My name is Theo Marsh, and I count birds for a living, which sounds like a made-up job until you learn how many industries pay for it. I'm an avian monitoring biologist, and the people who write my checks are the ones who put up wind farms, because the law says if your turbines kill migrating birds, you have to know how many and which kinds. And somebody has to walk the rows and count the bodies and watch the sky and file the reports. That somebody was me that autumn at a wind installation called Greywether Ridge, out on the high plains where the wind never stops, and the nearest town is 40 minutes of gravel road away. I'm telling you all this up front so you know I'm not a man who scares easy and not a man prone to seeing things. I count. I record. I'm good at noticing what's actually there, which is exactly why what happened at Greywether has stayed with me. Because for once, noticing what was actually there was the problem. I took the contract because my sister Rennie needed help. She's older than me by 4 years, and she'd gotten sick that summer. The kind of sick that eats through savings. And I'd been couch surfing between short field jobs, and I didn't have much, but I could redirect what I had to her. And the Greywether contract was 6 months, guaranteed, with a field bonus for the remote posting. So I said yes to living in a construction trailer on a ridge in the middle of nowhere from September through February, counting dead birds under 140 turbines, because it meant I could send Rennie money every 2 weeks and call her every night and pretend I wasn't scared for her. That's the whole reason I was there. Money for my sister and a signal strong enough to hear her voice. Greywether wasn't fully operational when I arrived. That mattered later. It was in commissioning, the phase where the turbines are built and standing, but not all of them are spinning yet, where the operator brings them online in blocks, testing each as it goes. So on any given day, maybe 80 of the 140 were turning. The rest stood still, white and enormous and patient, waiting for their turn. The company wanted baseline mortality data during commissioning, which is standard, and I was the baseline. Me, a truck, a clipboard, a GPS unit, and a route. The route was the routine, and the routine was simple. Every morning before light, I'd drive the service roads to a set of turbines and walk a search plot around the base of each one. A measured circle, back and forth in transects like mowing a lawn, looking down for carcasses, birds, bats. When I found one, I'd flag it, photograph it, record the species and the condition and the GPS point, bag it and log it. Then I'd drive to the next. 140 towers is more than you can do in a day, so I worked them on a rotation, a block at a time, and by the time I finished the last block, it was time to start the first again. Round and round. It's tedious and it's lonely, and there's a particular grief to it, cataloging the ones the blades take, but I believed in the work. You can't protect a thing you refuse to count. The man I answered to on site was the commissioning lead, a lean, sunburned guy named Halvorsen who'd been building wind farms for 20 years and had the calm of someone who's watched a lot of enormous, dangerous machinery not kill anyone on his watch. He wasn't my boss exactly. I worked for the environmental consultancy. He worked for the operator, but he ran the ridge, and he was decent to me, which counts for a lot when you're the only 2 people who sleep on a mountain. We had our routines cross. He'd radio me in the mornings to tell me which turbines were locked out for maintenance, so I wouldn't walk under a blade someone might spin. I'd radio him if I found anything unusual in my plots. We ate dinner together most nights in the commissary trailer, canned chili and bad coffee and whatever he'd smuggled up from town. And we talked, the way 2 men on a mountain talk, slow and sideways, about nothing and then occasionally about everything. He had an ex-wife he still loved and a bad hip. I had Rennie. We were company for each other. I want that on the record because Halvorsen was the best part of Greywether, and because of how it went with him. The turbines had numbers, T1 through T140, stenciled on the base of each tower. and the numbers ran in blocks by the phase of construction. And within about a week, I noticed the first thing that was off. And it was such a small thing that I'm almost embarrassed to say it was the first thread I pulled. There was no T113. The numbers ran 1 through 140, but 113 was missing. Not a downed tower, not a gap in the ground. The towers themselves were all there, 140 of them. I counted them from the ridge with binoculars, because counting is what I do. But the stenciled numbers skipped 113. It went T112, and then the next tower in the row was T114. And there were still 140 towers, which meant somewhere the count had picked up an extra to make up for the skip. I mentioned it to Halvorsen at dinner. He didn't look up from his chili. "Superstition," he said. "Old crews won't number a 13 if they can help it. You'll see 13 skipped on cranes, on floor plans, all over. It's nothing. They just renumber around it." That made sense. Construction is full of that stuff. I let it go. But I'm a person who logs things, and I logged it. In the little field notebook I keep for observations that don't fit the official forms. No T113 per HV superstition. And then, because I couldn't help it, I went and found the tower that stood between 112 and 114. And its base was blank. Not stenciled 114. Not stenciled anything. The stencil started again at 114 on the tower after it. There was a tower with no number at all, standing between the numbered ones, turning its blades with the rest, and nobody had given it a name. I decided it was an oversight. A painter who ran out of stencil or lost count. I photographed the blank base and moved on. The routine held for the first few weeks, and I got good at it. And I want to describe one part of the routine because it becomes important. The carcass searches have a known problem, which is scavengers. You count the birds the turbines kill, but coyotes and hawks and beetles get to the bodies too. And fast. So a carcass you'd have found at dawn might be gone by the time you reach that plot in the afternoon. The science accounts for this with correction factors. And part of establishing those factors is knowing your scavenger community who's out there eating the evidence. And how quick. So in my first week, I set up trail cameras, motion triggered, at a handful of plots, pointed at the ground where carcasses tend to fall, to photograph whatever came to feed. Normal practice, standard equipment, cheap cameras on stakes, swapped their memory cards every few days, reviewed the images at night on my laptop in the trailer. The cameras are how I met the thing I still don't have a name for, and how it first came to me as something almost tender. The images were mostly what you'd expect. Coyotes, mostly, and a lot of ravens, and once a badger, and endless empty frames triggered by grass moving in the wind. But on the camera at the plot under the blank tower, the one between 112 and 114, there was something else. It showed up in the frames taken between about 3 and 4 in the morning, in the infrared, which renders everything in that flat gray night vision light. And what it showed was a shape. I'll describe it exactly, because I've had a lot of time to get the description right. It was tall. The frame gave me scale against the tower base, and it stood maybe 7 feet, and it was thin. And it moved on 2 legs, but wrong. Too slow and too smooth, the way a heron moves when it's stalking, that patient, horrible grace. It had long arms it kept folded, and it was doing something gentle. In frame after frame, night after night, it was crouching over the ground where the carcasses fell. And it was picking up the dead birds, one at a time, and it was cupping them in its long hands and holding them. And this is the part I can't get people to understand. It was smoothing their feathers, straightening them, the way you'd compose a body. It gathered the small broken bodies the blades had made, and it arranged them, tenderly. And then it carried them off toward the blank tower, and the frames went empty. My first honest reaction was not fear. That's the thing I have to be truthful about. My first reaction was that I'd finally seen the thing every field biologist half hopes to see, the anomaly, the animal that isn't in the book. I thought a person, first, some local, some grieving eccentric who came at night to bury the birds. And I felt a rush of feeling for whoever that was, because I understood it. The wanting to give the counted dead some dignity. And when the images made a person impossible, the height, the proportions, the way it held completely still for 11 minutes in one sequence, not a human stillness, I moved to the next hope, which was that it was some large owl or a trick of the infrared, a scavenger I could name. I spent 3 nights trying to name it. I couldn't. And even then, watching a 7-foot thing gather dead sparrows in its hands and stroke their feathers straight, the feeling I had was closer to gratitude than terror. Because it was doing what I did, only kinder. I counted the dead. It cared for them. I didn't tell Halvorsen. I told myself it was because I wanted more data before I said anything, which was true. And I've since admitted to myself it was also because I didn't want him to tell me it was nothing, the way he'd told me the missing number was nothing. I wanted it to be something. Out there, 40 minutes from anyone, sending all my money to a sick sister and all my evenings to her voice on a bad phone line. I wanted the mountain to have a secret that was mine. So I studied it. I moved cameras. I learned it. And that's when the harmless, strange thing started turning into the other kind. The thing kept to the blank tower's plot, mostly, but not entirely. As October went on, and the operator brought more turbines online, more blades started turning, and the kill count rose across the whole ridge, and the thing's range widened with the killing. Wherever the dead accumulated, it went, gathering, composing, carrying off. And I noticed, because noticing is the job, that the carcasses it took never showed up in my searches. The plots the thing worked came up empty in the mornings, cleaner than scavengers could account for, cleaner than the correction factors said they should be. Which meant my mortality counts for those plots were low, artificially low. The turbines at Greywether were killing more birds than my numbers said, because something was tidying the evidence away before dawn. And my reports, the reports that would tell the state and the federal people whether this wind farm was safe for the migration, were going to say Greywether was gentler than it was. That's a real problem. That's the kind of thing that gets a wind farm approved that shouldn't be, that gets built at the next ridge and the next. I sat with that. I could correct for it if I understood it. But I couldn't put a 7-foot feather smoothing anomaly in a federal report. And I couldn't file numbers I knew were wrong either. I was already, that early, in a small, quiet bind that had no clean way out. And I didn't yet know it was going to get so much worse. The rules came in the middle of October, and they came from Halvorsen. And they came so casually that I almost missed that they were rules at all. We were at dinner. He'd been quiet, and then he said, not looking at me, "You've been running cameras out on the north blocks, at night." It wasn't a question. He'd seen the stakes, or seen my truck out late. I said yes, scavenger characterization, standard stuff. He nodded slowly and ate for a while. And then he said, "Let me give you a few things. Not company policy. Just things that make the nights up here go smoother. For your own sake." And he told me 4 of them. Plain. Like a man telling you which gas station has the good coffee. 1. Don't go out to the towers between 3 and 4 in the morning. He said the maintenance crews sometimes did unscheduled work in that window, and it wasn't safe to be walking under blades in the dark. 2. If your cameras catch something you can't identify, don't follow it, and don't go to wherever it's headed. He said the ridge had old mine subsidence and sinkholes, and people who wandered off the roads at night got hurt. 3. Keep your counts honest, but keep them to yourself until the end of the contract. File the raw numbers. Don't editorialize. Don't send the operator theories, because theories on a commissioning site have a way of stopping the money. And I needed the money, didn't I? And 4. The one he said last and lightest. The one that sat in my chest afterward. If you ever find a bird that isn't dead, that's fallen and is hurt but still alive, out on those plots at night, leave it. Don't pick it up. Don't take it back to the trailer to fix. Just note it and leave it where it is. I asked him about that last one because it was strange and because it went against everything in me. You find a hurt bird, you help it. That's the whole reason a person becomes what I am. He looked at me for a long moment across the little table with the bad light buzzing over us, and he said, I know how it sounds. I'm asking anyway. The hurt ones aren't yours to take. Trust me on it. I've been up here longer than you. And he wouldn't say more, and I let it go. Because he'd never steered me wrong, and because it was late. And because I could tell it cost him something to say it. I want to be honest that I heard those 4 rules the way you hear safety talk on any site half seriously, filing it as the local color of a careful man. Don't be out at 3 a.m. Don't chase things in the dark. Keep your head down about the numbers. Leave the hurt birds. Sensible mostly, if you squinted, except for the last one, which wasn't sensible at all, and which he'd asked me to follow anyway. I told him I would, and for a couple of weeks I did. Then the cameras caught the thing doing something new, and I broke the second rule and the first. And I've thought since that Halvorsen had given me those rules in the exact order I was going to break them, like a man who already knew how it goes. It was the last week of October. The images from the blank tower's camera changed. The thing was still gathering the dead birds, still smoothing them. But now, in the 3 to 4 window, it wasn't carrying them off right away. It was laying them out. On the ground at the base of the blank tower, in the infrared gray, it arranged the little bodies in rows. Careful, even rows, dozens of them, wingtip to wingtip, like a display, like a ledger written in the dead. And it would crouch there, over the rows for a long time. Its long head bowed, doing nothing, just looking at them, the way you'd look at a list you were checking twice. And then, near 4, it would gather them all again, and carry them to the tower, and be gone before the light. I couldn't stop watching those sequences. There was something in the rows that felt like meaning, like the thing was keeping account of its own. A private tally under the tower nobody had named. And on the 3rd night of the new behavior, reviewing the card in the trailer with Rennie's voice still in my ear from our nightly call, she'd sounded tired. She'd sounded worse, and I was raw with it. I did the thing I'd told Halvorsen I wouldn't do. I decided to go out and see. Not at 3. I told myself I was being careful. I went out at first light, well after 4, after the thing was always gone, to look at the ground under the blank tower, to see the rows in daylight, to find some feather or track or sign I could actually name. I drove out with the sky going gray, and I parked and I walked to the base of the tower with no number. And the ground was bare. Swept bare. No rows of birds, no feathers, no scavenger sign, nothing but the packed dirt and the enormous white column going up into the low cloud, and the blade shadow sweeping over me, slow, again, again. But someone had been there before me, and long before me, and left something behind. And it's the reason I'm telling you any of this, instead of writing it off as a bad autumn on a lonely ridge. Bolted to the base of the blank tower, at chest height, was a small steel inspection plate, the kind every tower has, that covers a wiring junction. And this one was loose. One bolt missing, hanging slightly ajar. I opened it to close it properly. You don't leave junction boxes open in that wind. And inside, tucked behind the wiring where no maintenance tech would look, was a field notebook, not mine, older, water-stained, the cover soft with handling, the kind of notebook I carry, the kind every field biologist carries. Someone had done my job here before me, before commissioning, before the towers even had their numbers. And they'd hidden their notebook inside the one tower that never got a name. I opened it to the last written page. The handwriting was cramped and it got worse toward the bottom, the way writing does when a hand is tired or frightened. Most of the page was a data table, species and counts, the ordinary bones of our work. But the last 3 lines weren't data. They read, "The count under 113 never matches the count I take back. It keeps some. I think it is keeping them for a reason, and I think the reason has a number. When the number is full, I do not think it will need the towers anymore." And below that, in a different, steadier hand, a second person, writing later, answering the first across who knows how much time, 1 line only. "It's almost full. Marsh, don't let it show you the last one." I stood there in the wind with my own name on the page, written by a hand I'd never seen, under a tower with no number. And above me, the blade came around again, slow, patient, and swept its long shadow over me and the open box and the notebook, once and then again. I took the notebook back to the trailer, and I did what a person does with a thing that can't be true. I built a story around it that let me sleep. The story went like this. There'd been a biologist here before me, during the earliest survey work, before the towers were numbered, and he'd been out here too long, and too alone, the way I was getting to be. And he'd started seeing patterns that weren't there, the way lonely people do. And he'd written down his fear in a notebook and hidden it in a junction box like a man hiding a bottle. And then somebody else, a maintenance tech, another surveyor, Halvorsen for all I knew, had found the notebook and thought it was a grim joke and written a grim joke back. The Marsh line was harder. My name is common enough. Or the second writer had known I was coming, had seen my name on a contract or a delivery manifest, and left a message for the new guy, the way crews leave messages. Cruel and bored. It's almost full. Don't let it show you the last one. That's the kind of thing you write to spook the next person into the chair. I'd have written it myself at 20. It was a good story. I want you to know I actually believed it for about a week, because that week matters. Because it was the last week that Halvorsen and I were just 2 men on a mountain. The routine held. That's the thing about the routine, it holds you, even when everything under it is coming apart. The way a handrail holds you on a stair that's on fire. Every morning before a light, I drove the service roads and walked my transects and looked down for the dead. Every morning, Halvorsen radioed me the lockouts. Every night we ate and I called Rennie. She was worse. The doctors had a new word for it that week. A word that meant the thing they'd been hoping to avoid. And the money I was sending had stopped being a help toward getting better and started being a help toward getting through. Which is a different kind of money, and both of us knew it, and neither of us said it. I'd sit in the trailer with the phone hot against my ear and her voice thin down the bad line, and I'd look at the notebook on the little table and think, at least I'm not the kind of crazy that hides notebooks in towers. At least I still know what's real. Then one morning, the routine was wrong by one detail. And it was such a small wrong that I almost drove past it. I was walking the plot under T46, an ordinary numbered tower out on the east block. And I found a bird. A golden-crowned kinglet, tiny, a scrap of a thing, dead at the base of the tower the way they are. And I did the routine. Flag, photograph, species, condition, GPS point, bag, log. And then I noticed that its feathers were smooth, composed, straightened, lying wingtip to body the way you'd lay a thing you were sorry about. Birds that hit a blade don't land composed. They land wrong, broken angled, feathers every direction. This one had been arranged. Out on the east block, under a numbered tower, in the daylight, miles from the blank tower where the thing kept to itself at 3 a.m. It had started coming to the numbered towers. It had started leaving them for me to find. I stood there holding the little bag with the smoothed bird in it, and I did the arithmetic I didn't want to do, which was that the thing knew I was reading the ground, that it had watched me count and had decided to leave me a counted one. It had gone from tidying the evidence away to presenting the evidence. And the only reason a thing does that is to be understood. It wanted me to see that it saw me. I didn't tell Halvorsen. Rule 3, keep it to yourself. I told myself I was following the rule. I was following the fear. But Halvorsen noticed me not telling him, which is a thing that happens between two men who eat every dinner together. He got quiet in a new way. And 2 nights after the smoothed kinglet, he set his fork down in the middle of the chili, and he said, "You found one that was fixed up, didn't you? Out on a numbered plot." I didn't answer fast enough. He nodded like I'd confirmed it, which I had. He rubbed his bad hip the way he did when he was working up to something. "It doesn't usually leave the one it works," he said. "It stays down by the empty tower. That's the whole arrangement. That's why it's tolerable. It stays where it stays." He looked old suddenly, in the buzzing light. If it's coming up to the numbered ones and leaving you a composed bird, that means it's counting you in. It's showing you its work. You understand? It only shows you its work when it's decided you're going to be part of the count. I said the thing you say. I said, "Hal, it's a scavenger. Something we haven't identified. A big owl, a person, I don't know. There's an explanation." And he looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite fear, and he said, "There's always an explanation. Doesn't mean it's the one you want. I've been up on these ridges 20 years. Every wind farm's got a low block, a bad number, a tower they don't like to name. Most of the time, nothing comes of it, because most crews leave it alone. We were leaving it alone. And then you put a camera on it." He didn't say it like a blame. He said it like a diagnosis. "You looked at it, Theo. That's all it needs. It needs to be counted, same as those birds. And now it's counting back." That was the closest anyone ever came to explaining it to me. And it explained nothing. And it explained everything. And both of those are true. The thing under the tower, with no number, had been ignored into a kind of stability. A truce made of not looking. And I'd broken the truce with a $40 trail camera because I was lonely, and I wanted the mountain to have a secret. I'd wanted it to be something. It had heard me want that, and it had turned toward me. I stopped running the cameras after that. I pulled the stakes. I told myself I was starving it of attention, that if looking was what fed it, then not looking would let the truce reset. And for a while, it seemed to work. No more composed birds on the numbered plots. The routine went back to being just tedious and lonely and sad. I filed my counts, the raw numbers, honest as I could make them. And I didn't editorialize. And I didn't put a 7-foot thing in a federal report. And the small, quiet bind of my low mortality counts sat there unresolved because I had bigger things sitting on me. Rennie mostly. Rennie and the notebook, which I couldn't throw away and couldn't stop reading. The rule I broke, when I finally broke it, I broke for the reason Halvorsen had named my face. The one I'd promised him I wouldn't. The hurt one. It was mid-November. Cold coming in hard, the wind carrying ice. I was on a dawn transect under T-89, and I found a bird alive. A short-eared owl, down in the frozen grass, one wing dragging, breathing fast, its yellow eyes open and tracking me, terrified and furious and alive. Owls are protected. Owls are the kind of thing I'd built my whole life around. And I had a warm trailer and a heat lamp and a shoebox and $40 of gauze in my kit. And I knew how to stabilize a bird like this. I'd done it 100 times. And it would live if I took it, and it would die if I left it in that grass in that cold. Leave the hurt ones. Don't pick it up. Note it and leave it where it is. I stood over that owl for a long time. And I thought about Rennie, which makes no sense and made perfect sense. Because she was the reason I couldn't leave a living thing to freeze while I had the means to save it. Watching one thing die that you could have saved teaches you not to do it again. And I'd been watching Rennie die by inches down a phone line for 2 months, and I physically could not, walk away from a warm heartbeat in the cold that I had hands enough to fix. So I broke Halvorsen's 4th rule. I picked the owl up, I wrapped it, and I put it in the truck, and I took it back to the trailer, and I set up the lamp and the box, and I splinted the wing, and I gave it fluids, and I sat up with it, and it lived. And for about 6 hours, I felt like a person again, like the person I'd been before the mountain. A man who counts the dead and saves the living and knows the difference. Halvorsen paid for it, not me. That's the part I have to say plainly because it's the part I can't put down. The owl was gone in the morning. The box was there, the lamp still warm, the gauze I'd wrapped it in lying loose and unbloodied in the bottom of the box, like the bird had simply been lifted out of it. The trailer door was locked from the inside the way I'd left it. And Halvorsen didn't answer his radio for the morning lockouts. I found his truck at the base of the blank tower, the one with no number. He'd driven out there in the dark, which he never did, which he'd told me never to do. And the truck was empty, engine off, door open, his coffee thermos still upright in the cup holder and still warm when I touched it. And the ground under the tower, the ground that was always swept bare the ground, had rows on it. Even rows, wingtip to wingtip, dozens and dozens of small dead birds laid out careful in the frost, more than I'd ever seen in the camera frames. A whole season of the taken ones brought up into the daylight and arranged. And at the end of the last row, past the birds, laid out just as careful, composed, his hands folded and his feathers smoothed if a man could be said to have feathers, was Halvorsen. Not broken, not bloodied, arranged, made decent, the way it made everything decent that it counted. I don't know how it happened, and I've stopped trying to know. I know he went out there in the window he told me never to go out in, to the place he told me never to go. And I know he did it the same night I broke the one rule he'd asked me to keep. And I know a thing that keeps account doesn't take without balancing. I'd taken a living one it hadn't finished with. Something living had to go back into the rows to make the number right. And it hadn't taken me. It had taken the nearest one, the one who'd been up here longest, the one who'd known the arrangement and kept it for 20 years until the new man with the camera came and broke it. It took him instead of me. And I have never been able to decide whether that was mercy or a message. Whether it spared me or was simply telling me that I was the one it was keeping for later. That I was the last one, and Halvorsen was just the price of showing me. Don't let it show you the last one. I understood the notebook then. The last one wasn't a bird. I called it in. Of course I called it in. There's a whole apparatus for a death on a work site, and it descended on Greywether within hours. The operator's people and the sheriff, and eventually the OSHA investigator. And I told them the truth in the only shape that could be told. I said Halvorsen had gone out to the towers alone in the early morning, against his own safety practice, and that I'd found his truck and then found him, and that I didn't know why he'd gone out there. All of that was true. I did not say what he'd been laid out among or how. By the time the sheriff got up the ridge, the rows were gone, swept bare again, and there was just a man dead at the base of a tower in the cold. And the ruling, when it came, was exposure and a cardiac event. An old man with a bad heart out too far in bad weather, and everyone accepted it because it was the explanation they wanted. And I let them, because the true one had no place to go. There's no line on the OSHA form for it. There's no box to check. I could have left then. The contract had a clause, a death on site. I could have invoked it and gone home, and no one would have blamed me. I stayed. I want to be honest about why I stayed, because it's the least flattering thing in this whole account. I stayed for the money. Rennie was worse every week, and the field bonus for the remote posting was real money. The kind that doesn't come again. And the contract paid through February. And if I walked, I lost it. And my sister was dying, and money was the only thing I had left to give her that helped. So I stayed on a mountain with the thing that had arranged my only friend into a row of the dead. And I kept counting, because the counting paid. And I told myself, Halvorsen had told me himself, hadn't he? Keep your head down. Take the money. I needed the money, didn't I? He'd said it like it was for my sake. Maybe it had been. The routine held. God help me, the routine held even then. I drove the roads before light. I walked the transects. I logged the dead. And the thing under the blank tower left me alone. Mostly. The way it had left Halvorsen alone for 20 years. Because I did the thing that keeps the truce, which is I stopped looking. I never pointed a camera at it again. I never went out in the 3 to 4 window. I never picked up another living bird. I noted them and I left them, every one, in the cold. And each time I left one, I felt Halvorsen's warm thermos in my hand and understood exactly what the rule had been for and exactly what it had cost to teach it to me. I became a man who keeps the arrangement. That's what the mountain made me. Not a hero and not a victim. A keeper of a truce I'd broken and then spent the winter re-keeping over the body of the man who'd kept it before me. Rennie died in January. I got the call in the trailer, my brother-in-law's voice, and I drove down the gravel road 40 minutes to where the signal was strong and sat in the truck in a gas station lot and cried where no one on the ridge could see me. And then I drove back up and finished my transects the next morning because there was nothing else to do with my hands, and because the counting was all I had left that still worked. I don't know if the mountain took her too. I've thought about it more than I can stand. She was sick. She was always going to die. The doctors had a word for it. But I keep account now, the way you do, of everyone I've lost since I put a camera on that tower. And it's a longer count than a man my age should have. And I can't make myself believe all of it is chance. And I can't make myself believe it isn't. And living in that gap is its own kind of sentence. I finished the contract. February came, and the last block came online. And Greywether went fully operational, all 140 towers turning. And my baseline data went into the report that would tell the state the ridge was safe for the migration. My numbers were low, I knew they were low. I knew the true kill was higher because something had been carrying the evidence into the rows all season. And I filed the low numbers anyway, honest to the letter and false to the truth. Because the true numbers came with a 7-foot explanation I couldn't write down. So Greywether is certified gentle. And somewhere a company is looking at that certification and choosing the next ridge and the next one after that. And I put my name on it. I'm part of how it spreads. That's the quiet thing I carry that has nothing to do with the anomaly at all. That one's just me. Just a broke man who filed the numbers that paid. I left the notebook where I found it. I couldn't take it and I couldn't destroy it. So I put it back in the junction box behind the wiring. And I closed the plate. And I replaced the missing bolt. Tightened it down myself, because it felt like the one right thing left to do. To leave the message for whoever comes next the way it was left for me. And I added a line. My own hand under the other two. I wrote, "It took Halvorsen to balance the one I saved. It leaves you alone if you leave it alone. Don't run the cameras." And then, because the second writer had known my name, because someone always knows the next name, I did the thing I swore I wouldn't. I did the cruel, bored thing that gets passed down the chain. I asked the mountain the only question I had left by leaving a blank line under my warning. A line for the answer, the way you leave a space for a reply. The new monitoring biologist arrived last week. I know because the consultancy sent me the onboarding paperwork to review since I'd worked the site. A courtesy, a formality. His contract, his route, his trailer assignment, and his name. I'd written the blank line in November. I sealed the box myself. Nobody's opened it since. The operator confirmed the blank tower's junction hasn't been serviced. It never is. That's the whole point of it. But I know what's on that line now, because it's on the paperwork in front of me. The new man's name printed clean at the top of his contract, and I know that if I drove the 40 minutes and the gravel road and the service roads and opened that plate, I'd find my blank line filled in a steadier hand than mine, answered the way the mountain answers, ahead of the question, the way it left my name before I ever came. His name is on the contract. It's already on the line. The count isn't full yet, but it's closer.